All right, so I've had 24 hours now to test out the brand new M1 Max 14-inch MacBook, and I'm actually coming from the 13-inch M1 as well. These are both fully spec'd out with RAM, everything you can do. The only thing is the hard drive. I got a 1 terabyte on the 13, 2 terabyte on the new one, but that shouldn't affect performance. Really what I wanna do in this one is introduce you guys to these two laptops, compare them, contrast them, and what I've been able to pick up over the last 24 hours. I gotta say, the M1 actually blew me away when I switched to this months ago. The editing, everything I do is in Final Cut. It was so fast, so I am just hyped up for this, especially with the slightly larger screen, ProMotion, everything loaded in here. So let's go ahead and dive into these two laptops, and I'll give you my initial 24-hour impression of the two, what I like, what I don't like about the new one, some quirks I found personally, especially for a pro video editing workflow. Let's dive in. So one of the biggest things on a laptop is gonna be the screen, right? So right off the bat, I always felt like the 13 worked for me. I was coming from a 15-inch before that, and I use a 16-inch MacBook Pro for my work computer, so I'm familiar with all those screen sizes. And the 13-inch at first was kind of startling, but then you kind of get used to it, but especially in Final Cut, you need more screen real estate than that. So I am super excited for this, but then when you include things like a 14-inch display, ProMotion, XDR, is it really that much of a leap over the 13-inch? Honestly, it's pretty nice because the 13-inch, when I had this, it was weird coming from the 15-inch, right? Especially in Final Cut where you've got a lot of different things going on. You really want to be able to see your primary video, you've got your timelines, everything else, all your clips you need to edit, effects, etc. And so the 13-inch worked. I actually was surprised how well it worked. However, the funny thing is also when I switched to this using my 16-inch MacBook Pro for work, just felt like a behemoth. It was such a massive laptop. And so when I saw they were doing a 14-inch screen on the new one, I was super excited because honestly, after using it for a day now, I can confirm for me, it's like the perfect size. Between portability, usability, you do get a resolution bump. The ProMotion is interesting, right? So it's 120 Hertz. It's gonna be double the previous one. I completely forgot at first. I started using it and I was kind of like, is this noticeable? But then when you're swiping desktops, when you're pinch zooming in Google Maps or things like that, it's super noticeable because it's just really smooth. So it does make a difference in terms of aesthetics. I don't think functionally it necessarily makes a huge difference. If you are a gamer, I'm sure that's a scenario where it would. For the stuff I use it for, I think the ProMotion is nice, but I wouldn't necessarily consider it essential. I also am big on color calibrating these. So I use the Spider tools. I've been using it for years now across all my laptops, all my monitors, etc. And I've always noticed the Apple default display kind of comes with a green hue to it. So I thought that was really interesting. The new one, definitely right away I turned it on, I noticed it. I'm just used to the tweaking. You gotta bring in a little red, turn down the green a little bit, and that's all done by the calibration tool itself. Same thing on here. However, if you go into displays, the interesting thing is there's no setting for color profile there. All of a sudden I thought they removed it. Oh, it's Apple, it's XDR. We're just gonna take care of it for you and tell you how things need to work. Fortunately, there's still ways to edit it. So there's a thing called Color Sync Utility. Basically that lets you import what is an ICC profile that used to be easily done through the selection process inside of your color settings inside a display. Now you basically open Color Sync, you have to manually find and load that file. That file gets output by any of these color calibrators, so you can still do it. And luckily it does work, so I was able to calibrate it. So another interesting thing, because the calibration tool will measure the different gamuts that the screen actually covers, and it's never perfect, right? And every single display is going to be slightly different out of the factory. So this one came with what it said was 98% P3. However, it did cover a little bit of areas that weren't P3. So basically, let's call it right around 100%. Adobe, you're coming in at like 89%. So it's not the best. Standard RGB, boom, you're going to cover the whole spectrum there easily. The 1000 nits and 1600 peak is only for HDR content. So everyday visibility, I thought this was gonna be like a daylight visible monitor. That's not the case. It's only going up to 500. So any standard definition, any normal browsing, you're gonna get up to 500 nits, which is respectable. Like it's definitely solid. But again, Apple kind of massaging what they do, saying that it's the 1000 and 1600. While it can achieve that, it's only HDR content. So just be aware of that. The notch, I gotta say, functionally, I have no issues with, right? It's there, it's bigger than it needs to be. Maybe they'll have Face ID, maybe not. What annoys me is the toolbar just like slightly sticks below it. I don't know why it's not flush, because that part of the screen could totally be used for apps and other things. What's even more interesting there, I found out, is if you do auto hide, which I'm not gonna leave on, but if you do the auto hide of the top toolbar, then you can actually expand windows exactly flush with the notch. It's a weird quirk. I don't know if they're gonna change this in the future. Maybe people will complain about it, or maybe people don't care. And it's just my OCD, but that was something that stood out to me. Like, I wish I just got that little extra millimeter or two of space, and I wish the toolbar was flush with the notch on the new one. Battery life now, I gotta be honest. So again, 24 hours, I've not had a lot of time. I haven't run these through a lot. I think the old M1's actually gonna get better battery life, probably due to the screen, probably due to the resolution, probably due to a lot of factors, but I used to leave Final Cut just open in the background on here editing a project while I'm also watching videos, YouTube, browsing the web, whatever, and this thing would go days. And when I say days, I'm not using it as my work laptop 8 hours a day, but it was on a lot of times. Like, it would be on easily 6 hours a day with Final Cut in the background or actively editing. I'm editing photos in Lightroom. And it just astounded me how long this lasted. I do feel like I perceived a definite stronger drain on this. So I'm at 24% right now. I had it fully charged yesterday up through 2 p.m. is when I unplugged it. I used it a good amount last night. Only things I was doing though was browsing the web, and I did some editing in Lightroom. I didn't have Final Cut open or anything. So to see 75% drain already by the next morning, we'll do future tests where I do a lot more performance. I'm gonna do a week, probably a month follow-up review on this laptop to let you guys know more, but I wanna give you honest information as I have it. So my initial perceived reaction is that the battery life is not quite as good on the 14-inch as it was on the 13-inch M1. I wanna talk about one thing real quick. I honestly switched to CF Express Type A mostly. However, my drones, things like that, are still gonna use these. It is so nice to be able to put that back in the laptop. It almost feels weird because I haven't done that in 4 years. Is it essential? The funny thing is the CF Express Type A readers, those are the cards I use in my Sony cameras. They're gonna also work with an SD card. They're dual compatible just like the cameras themselves. So like with Sony's right here, you can see that's actually the exact same slot. It's not that much thicker, and it allows you to put both cards into that. Just kind of wish they did that. Future iteration, maybe, we'll see. I think probably CF Express Type A is not adopted enough for them to have justified that. Size-wise, thickness, yeah, the new one is definitely thicker, not by a ton. Perception, though, is everything. And this is probably where the Apple designs of the past make big differences, right? So if you look, this slopes very slowly in towards the laptop. So the actual thickness, while it's not that different, because the edge of this is gonna slope basically straight down and then cut in, gives them a lot more internal space. But when you look at it on the table, it also looks a lot thicker. I don't really care. Ultimately, weight, size, everything, it's not gonna change how much space it takes up in your backpack, and adding just a little bit marginal size is definitely worth it for the larger improved screen, the better performance, everything. So good on Apple for kind of bringing back these design cues. I know a lot of people are talking about that. I also like having USB-C ports on both sides, Thunderbolt 4 ports on both sides. MagSafe, I could have lived without. So what I'm really happy about when they brought back MagSafe is that it's just a USB-C to a MagSafe. You can still use the USB-C ports. And why is because there's a lot of great third-party adapters anymore out there, which frankly are a lot better than Apple's. We got 2 USB Type A's. We've got 2 up to 100 watts, so it disperses based on what needs to draw more power. Single port will give you 100, both can fluctuate anywhere from 1 to 99, back and forth. Much smaller, it has international adapters. This is something I've been using for a long time now and really appreciate. So that's where I just feel like I'm glad they brought it back. It wasn't necessarily essential for me. I fortunately don't trip over the cables a lot. I don't know if that's a problem for a lot of people, but yeah, I'm just glad you can still use third-party adapters. You can still go over regular USB-C if you want to, because I'm for sure probably gonna break or lose that MagSafe cable at some point. If you want to see color comparisons, I don't know why, I just felt like I wanted to go with the silver so badly again. It reminds me of the older ones. There's a little vintage-esque to it, and with the dark solid black keyboard underneath, I think that's a cool aesthetic. Both look great. I mean, it's an Apple product at the end of the day. The biggest thing to take away with the new design, which tells me Apple's headed in the right direction, is its function over form. For a long time, they went form over function, thin, light, etc. Now it's finally, okay, we can sacrifice some weight and some size to make sure it delivers on what it needs to on a performance benchmark. One thing that I found interesting just for me is side by side, the old one actually looks arguably more modern. And that's, again, I think the form over function. The OLED bar, which I want to say I basically stuck to the right section. I like that you could just grab volume and slide it. You don't have to press buttons back and forth. Also, I think the thinness of it makes it look a little more modern too. So it's just funny to see they came out with something new that's definitely way more functional, but form-wise, it may be, I don't want to say a step back, right? But it is a step in a different direction than Apple of previous years. Speakers. Coming from the 15-inch going to the 13-inch, that was honestly the biggest drawback that happened for me. Doesn't get nearly as loud, there's not as much bass, there's not as much clarity on the Pro. The 13-inch Pro of previous gens, the speakers are really lackluster, and it's because you don't have nearly as much space or size. So when I saw the 14-inch and 16-inch had the exact same speaker array, or at least the claimed speaker array, I don't know if they're the same size, I was excited. Turned it on, played some music, and I was like, well, it's not bad, it's not great. It's good. Like for a laptop, Apple's always leaps and bounds above other laptops in terms of their sound quality of their speakers. You can always use headphones. The funny thing is then I switched back to the old 13-inch and I was like, oh yeah, it's night and day difference. It's so much better on here. I'm only turning the volume up halfway, where on here for normal volume levels, you're like 3/4 almost to maxed out. Definitely really happy with the new speakers and the fact that the 14 and 16-inch at least have the claimed speaker array matching. I'm glad I made the jump. Did it justify the cost difference? I don't think I'm really gonna know until I dive in and do a ton of editing and things like that. Honestly, the M1 was so good. If I was coming from anything prior to the M1, I couldn't recommend this laptop more because I know how powerful the M1 was, and that's only 16 gigs of RAM. This is the M1 Max. I mean, the bus speed, the hard drive speed, everything is just so much more powerful than the M1 was, and that already blew me away. Like the time to actually render certain effects in Final Cut went from 30 seconds down to near instant when I jumped to the M1. But that's where I want to leave you guys with this initial 24-hour impression for now. Any questions, feel free to shoot them below. And definitely any tests you guys want to see in the next video. I think I'm going to give it about a week and do another sample. I will have to trade this guy in, so I'm not going to have it much longer, but I'll do some side-by-side rendering tests, just some general tests to see how they perform against one another. If you're on the M1, is it actually worth upgrading to the new one at the cost? So that's gonna do it for today then, guys. If you wanna see more, definitely hit that subscribe button, hit that thumbs up if you got anything out of this video. As always, it's been a pleasure, and I'll see you next time.